Hello. In this podcast, we will cover kindness and compassion. These are two concepts that mean different things to different people. According to the dictionary, kindness is defined as the quality or act of being friendly, generous, and considerate, and compassion as a sympathetic pity and concern for the suffering or misfortunes of other people or ourselves. But in reality, these are words that transcend these basic definitions. They mean more to us than that. What does compassion mean to you? What words, actions, or thoughts come to mind? What was the last act of kindness or compassion that you received? And how did that make you feel? Now, can you think of the last act of kindness or compassion that you completed? Was it to yourself or to someone else? And how did that make you feel? In this episode, I hope to delve a little deeper into what compassion and kindness mean to me, and establish how to use them to improve your mental health. Let's start with some proper definitions to help explain what compassion means. Within psychology, compassion is defined as a process with 3 steps. The first step is recognizing suffering. In this example, it would be that someone has depression or anxiety. The second step involves feeling moved by others' suffering, so that you feel empathy or sympathy for their circumstances. And that when you get this feeling, you get a desire to help the person who is suffering in some way. The third and final step is to act on this desire, using your knowledge, experiences, and sometimes resources to help that person reduce their suffering. Research shows that people who are kind and compassionate in this way are more satisfied with their lives, have better physical and mental health, and have stronger relationships. Being kind and compassionate helps to make yourself and other people feel happier. After all, we live in our thoughts 24/7, so of course, improving our thoughts would have the knock-on effect of improving our well-being. I separate kindness and compassion into 3 categories: self-compassion, giving kindness and compassion to others, and finally, accepting kindness and compassion from others. All of these categories are equally important, but statistically, self-compassion and accepting kindness and compassion from others are the ones that people with depression and anxiety struggle with. Using the definition we used earlier, self-compassion is just noticing that you aren't feeling the way that you want to, having a desire to change that, and using your knowledge, experiences, and resources to try and help yourself change those unwanted feelings. This sounds simple, right? But when we're having a difficult time, so when something goes wrong, or when you notice something that you don't like about yourself, can you guess what the typical reaction is? It's to beat ourselves up about it, to tell ourselves that we are stupid, that we deserve it, or sometimes to ignore it completely and act like these things aren't affecting us, by having this stiff upper lip mentality. Can you think of an example when you've responded like this? Because pretty much everybody has. It's just that depressed people or anxious people tend to do it more. Using the same example that you just thought of when you've been self-critical, think, if somebody else was in that position, would you say the same thing to them? Would you criticise them in the same way that you criticised yourself? Imagine that your best friend calls you after they've just been dumped by their partner and you pick up the phone and say, "How are you?" They respond, "Terrible." She's holding back the tears. She says, "You know that guy Michael I've been dating? Well, he's the first man I've been really excited about since my divorce, and last night he told me that I was putting too much pressure on him and that he just wants to be friends, and I'm devastated." And you respond and sigh and say, "Well, to be perfectly honest, it's probably because you're old, ugly and boring, not to mention needy and dependent. And you're at least 20 pounds overweight, your clothes don't fit, your hair is turning grey, and I'd probably just give up now, because there's really no hope of finding anyone who will ever love you. I mean, frankly, you don't deserve it." Most of us would never dream of saying anything like that to anyone, let alone somebody that we cared about. But strangely, this is precisely the type of way that we talk about ourselves in such situations. If you were compassionate, you would respond by saying, "I'm so sorry, are you okay? You must be really upset. I care about you and I will always be here. and ask if there is something that you can do to make them feel better. You can clearly see how different those two responses are, and I'm sure you can imagine how different the person who's just been dumped will react to those responses. Compassion is a spectrum. We can be massively uncompassionate, like that first example, which can have a massive negative effect on our mental health. Or we can be very compassionate, which would have the opposite effect. It could massively improve our mental health. You will sit somewhere on this spectrum. The purpose of this podcast is allow you to recognise where you sit on it and give you some tools to change it if you want to. In the UK, we have built up some misconceptions about this idea of self-compassion that have stopped us from taking it seriously. You might even believe in some of them. So let's go through them. We often fear that self-compassion will make us weak and vulnerable. But in reality, self-compassion is a reliable source of inner strength that shows us courage and enhances resilience when facing difficulties. Compassionate mind training has even been introduced within the British military and in professional sports teams across the country. People often think that self-compassion is really the same as being self-indulgent, but it's actually completely the opposite. Compassion inclines us to think long-term towards our health and well-being, not short-term pleasure. Just as a compassionate mother doesn't let their child eat all the ice cream she wants, but says, "Eat your vegetables." Another common one is that people think self-criticism, which is the opposite of self-compassion, is an effective motivator. But most of the time, it's not. Criticising yourself tends to undermine self-confidence and causes a whole host of other problems. If we're self-compassionate, we will still be motivated to reach our goals because a truly compassionate person is realistic and understands their situation. They are just focused on the solution rather than their current suffering. Although I understand all of these misconceptions, in reality, the importance of compassion has been proven through an extensive pool of psychological theories and effective compassionate-related clinical interventions. The way our brain works was shaped over millions of years of evolution, particularly in response to social motivation systems. This is our need to live in groups, to fit into social rankings within those groups, and to reproduce. These primal desires allowed us to survive long enough to reproduce and care for our young. But around 2 million years ago, pre-humans began to evolve the ability for reasoning, reflection, anticipation, imagining, mentalization, and the curation of socially contextualized senses of self. These new abilities can cause major conflicts with the older primal and emotional systems. An example of this would be our primal brain focuses on ranking us within a hierarchical system in social groups. This would be great as it would help us survive and avoid confrontation within those groups. But since we gained the ability to think deeper, we began to be more reflective. We started to recognise that our sense of self had been reduced, or in simple English, it upset us. Once this conflict in our evolution was recognised, a widely accepted consensus began to form that replacing these more negative automatic thoughts with more compassionate ones was the best way of improving our mental health. This isn't always a simple process. It's tough to change our thoughts, but for some people it's tougher than for others. If you have experienced a traumatic event, whether this is psychological or physical, if your parental figure didn't teach you or model you compassionate ways of thinking when you were a child, or you perceive self-compassion as being self-indulgent, or finally, because your perception of self is already so devalued that you don't think you deserve to have compassionate thoughts in the first place. For me, this process became challenging because I felt like these self-compassionate thoughts were peeling back a protective wall that I had built for myself. And this is very common. Our developmental histories or painful emotional or interpersonal experiences such as childhood experiences of shame, rejection, bullying, parental hostility, neglect or unresponsiveness teaches us to associate warmth, closeness and soothing with threats or not feeling safe. In other words, you can see compassion as a threat. If this is the case, you might find it hard to experience positive emotions towards yourself, and you may benefit from working with a clinical psychologist trained in compassion-focused therapy. who can help you to cultivate a more self-compassionate stance. If you would like to learn more about the psychological barriers stopping us from becoming self-compassionate, I strongly recommend looking for further ways to manage your inner critic, understanding your fears, blocks and other resistances to compassion, as well as understanding your window of tolerance to mood fluctuations. Not being compassionate to yourself could affect you in loads of different ways, but mainly in your behaviours and your thoughts. Therefore, they are logical places to start working on if you want to be more compassionate. So let's get into it. The first step would be to identify the problem and its cause. You could write down the things that you struggle with. These are the internal and external fears. Internal fears relate to anxiety, panic, shame, depression, or rage. And external fears relate to the power of the external world has over you, including rejection, shaming, and the potential for others to hurt you. This identifies your thoughts. Then we need to identify your behaviours. This is where we note down the defensive measures that you are taking to avoid getting hurt and minimising your risk. Internal defensive behaviours are used to keep the self from experiencing difficult internal situations or emotions, and it can include dissociation, substance misuse, harming oneself, and the constant reminder of your faults, flaws, and weaknesses. External defensive behaviours are intended to help the individual avoid harm from others, and include blaming the self, silencing the self, being submissive and non-assertive, distrusting others, and keeping others at a distance. Once you have identified these, try and get stuck into taking action on changing them. But if you struggle with that previous stage, that's completely understandable. A mental health professional would happily support you through this process. So let's start with the behaviours that you could introduce into your life to show compassion to yourself. Personally, I found working on these behaviours easier as an initial first step than improving my compassion through my thoughts. And you would try and implement these behaviours in that final stage of compassion. You've recognised there's a problem, you've shown empathy towards it and had a desire to change it, and then these are the steps that you would take to actually modify that behaviour or thought. If I wanted to start this process of showing myself more compassion physically, I'd start by doing more of the things that I want to do that aren't harmful to me. I'd think about what things I enjoy, used to enjoy, or would want to try. For me, this is things like music, reading, video games, going outdoors, socialising, earning money, playing sports, or doing some arts and crafts. But it could be anything. Hopefully, something has come to your mind. If not, refer to the list that we talked through in the Coping Mechanisms podcast. Once you've thought of one or two of these things that could potentially elevate your mood, try incorporating them into your life. Eventually, you may even be able to notice the early signs of when you're getting more depressed or anxious, or have a good idea how you will react to things that you know will impact you in the future. Planning to incorporate these positive activities in and around those difficult moments is a really effective way of showing yourself compassion and improving your depression and anxiety. The second technique that can be pretty effective is trying to improve on those aspects of our lives that we don't enjoy. This could be commuting to work and back, doing chores at home, going to hospital appointments, or any health complications that we may be experiencing. We all have aspects of our life that we don't enjoy. Sometimes we can cut them out of our lives completely, but most of the time there are things that we cannot change, or we have to stick with. There will inevitably be things that we must experience that we don't enjoy, but are necessary. This step is about recognising that, but also about understanding that most of the time we have the ability to improve them a little bit if we try. For example, let's take a hypothetical, boring and frustrating drive into work each day. Is there a podcast, audiobook, or specific radio station you like listening to? Is there a friend or family member that you haven't talked to in a while that you could call on your way back from home? Is there a view out the window, or even an opportunity to car share, or change your route to one with a little less traffic? If the cause of your suffering is out of your control, there are some things that you can do, but they will come up in the challenging thoughts techniques that we will cover later on. The third behavioural strategy is doing more things that are good for you. We call this self-care. Engaging in self-care routines has been clinically proven to reduce or eliminate anxiety and depression, reduce stress, and increase happiness. It can help you adapt to changes, build stronger relationships, and recover quicker from setbacks. Self-care includes taking care of your physical and psychological health, trying to learn new things and develop and improving your skills. Self-care practices will refuel you, helping you to take care of yourself and support those around you. There are so many ways to take care of yourself. Over time, you will be able to develop the right ones for you. But here are some good examples. You could go back and listen to the previous podcasts and try to implement any of the tips or advice that you have heard. This could be giving yourself time to exercise or eat well. It could be prioritizing your sleep more, or trying one of the healthy coping mechanisms. It could be something completely unrelated to these podcasts. For example, maintaining a good standard of personal hygiene, or keeping a clean bedroom. Finally, you can set boundaries with yourself and with other people. Giving yourself control over your environment can be a great way to reduce your anxiety and depression. Some great examples are things like not checking your emails at night, not answering your phone during meals, or learning to say no to things that you don't actually want to do. These are all actions of self-compassion, but being compassionate towards others also benefits us psychologically, and it also benefits them. A really cool book called Connected by Kristovic and Fowler called this phenomenon the ripple effect. It's how a kind or compassionate act transmits to the people around you, or in fancy words, results in emotional contagion. So here are the numbers they compiled from various psychological studies. It suggests that one kind or compassionate act transmits to 3 degrees of people removed from you. So essentially, it goes like this. If you are kind or compassionate to someone else, let's say you hold the door open for your neighbour Margaret and give them a smile. Margaret would be 16% more likely to be happier, kinder, and more compassionate towards herself and towards other people. That's the first degree of emotional contagion. Then, because they're more happier and more likely to be compassionate, Margaret gives someone they work with a compliment. They say, "Good work, Bob. Your spreadsheet was amazing." Therefore, Bob is 10% more likely to be happier, kinder, and more compassionate towards himself and towards other people, just because you were being kinder and more compassionate. So that's the second degree of emotional contagion. Because Bob's feeling better, when he comes back home from work and gives his daughter Amy a huge hug and tells her how much he loves her, Amy is 6% more likely to be happier, kinder, and more compassionate just because you were nice to your neighbour Margaret. To me, this is pretty wild, and it's testament to the impact that just one kind and compassionate thing can have on even a complete and utter stranger. And that makes me feel good. It makes me think that if I open the door and smile at someone, I may have just improved some random stranger's day. So these are all the physical things that we could do to try and improve the amount of compassion and kindness that we show to ourselves and other people. And they all go hand in hand with improving our emotions. Changing those negative thoughts into kind and compassionate ones is an important part of improving your mental health and is something that a lot of psychologists and counsellors will focus on. It's often a hard thing to do. After a while, our brains become programmed to think and respond to something automatically, and changing that is difficult, but often necessary and a hugely beneficial task. A psychologist could work through multiple different types of therapies to encourage you to have these kind and compassionate thoughts towards yourself. Each of these therapies has different styles of approaching the same goal. Compassion-focused therapy, CBT, and acceptance and commitment therapy are perfect examples of this type of therapy. They all aim to teach you practical ways of challenging and replacing those non-compassionate thoughts with desirable, compassionate ones. But here are some tips and tricks you could implement to help yourself and somebody else feel better. You want to make it as easy as possible to change those negative thoughts. So we would start by activating that parasympathetic, soothing response that we talk about in the Coping Mechanisms podcast. Clinically, the most effective way shown to encourage the ability to change negative thoughts is by the soothing rhythm breathing. To practice the soothing rhythm breathing exercise, first make sure that you are sitting comfortably with both feet flat on the floor, about shoulders width apart. Rest your hands on the top of your legs and close your eyes or look down at the floor. Let yourself have a gentle facial expression, like a small smile. Begin to focus on your breathing. Allow the air of each breath to come down into your diaphragm and feel it move in and out as you breathe. Play with the speed of your breath until you find a comfortable, soothing rhythm. You will likely find that your soothing rhythm is about 3 seconds in breath, a slight pause, and a 3-second out breath. Continue focusing just on your breathing. Next comes a grounding moment. Turn your attention to your body, sensing the weight of your body resting on the chair and the floor underneath you. Let yourself feel held and supported. Remember that it is okay for your mind to wander. Just notice where it wanders and gently guide your awareness back to your body. Feel the air flowing in and out of your nostrils and simply allow it to be. If you find yourself stuck on noticing your breathing, let yourself focus on an object instead. You can hold something like a smooth stone or a soft ball, something that feels good to hold. Focus on the object as well as your breathing. Take note of the way that it feels when you hold the object. Does it warm up in your hands? How heavy is it? And when you're ready, slowly open your eyes and bring yourself back to the present moment. A small stretch and a deep breath can help you to ready yourself for the rest of the exercises. If these breathing exercises don't work for you, that's fine. Have a listen back to the Coping Mechanisms or Alternative Therapy podcasts for some alternatives. But if you can achieve this sense of calmness, safety, and peace, then you're more likely to challenge those thoughts effectively. If not, that's okay. We can still try and tackle them. The first technique involves manipulating the fact that our brain loves shortcuts that cut out this stage of thinking in our mind. It does this by associating certain things or triggers with an emotional response. If you have depression or anxiety, you probably know this firsthand. You might instantly have a depressed or anxious feeling when listening to a certain song, being in a certain environment, or even just seeing a certain colour. We are going to use this to our advantage through imagery and creating a safe space. When I say safe space to you, what environment springs to your mind? What is the first place that pops into your consciousness? Your safe and peaceful place may be a beautiful forest with leaves dancing through the breeze. It may be the ocean, hearing the gentle waves crashing and rolling in and out of a soft sandy beach. It might be a special place for you, like your grandmother's kitchen when you were a child, or a special vacation place, or even just a bench at the end of your garden. Wherever it is, I want you to expand on it. Focus on what you would feel if you were in that place. You may feel the sun on your face, the softness of your pet sitting on your lap, a breeze lifting your hair, or the heat of a campfire burning. You may feel the sand between your toes or the warmth of a cosy kitchen. Next, think about what you would hear. You might hear rolling waves or seagulls crying at the beach. You might hear a fire crackling or the sounds of your grandmother baking. Perhaps you hear the purring of your cat or the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Now focus on what you can smell. Maybe the smell of cut grass or fresh air, the salty smell of the ocean, or the delicious scent of an apple pie baking in the oven, or even the smell of crackling log fire. Now allow your body to relax, your whole body, including your face. Let your shoulders roll back and lay your feet flat. Let your face show the pleasure of being at that safe space. Create an emotional connection with this place and return to it whenever you need to feel safe, loved, and at peace. The next techniques we're going to use play on our sense of identity. The first exercise is called the compassionate self. Once again, begin with your soothing rhythm breathing. When your body has slowed down a bit and you feel ready to begin, imagine that you are a deeply compassionate person. Think of all the qualities you would ideally have as that compassionate person. Focus on your desires to become a compassionate person and to be able to think, feel, and act compassionately. Imagine yourself with each of the qualities of compassion: wisdom, strength, warmth, and responsibility. First, imagine yourself with a wealth of wisdom. This wisdom comes from your understanding about the nature of life, of our minds and our bodies. Spend some time thinking about how it would feel to be this wise and have this wisdom. Next, when you have a grasp on how it feels to have this wisdom, imagine having strength. Allow your body posture to change in order to match how this compassionate strength feels. Imagine yourself as a person that understands your own difficulties and those of others in a non-judgmental way. And you have the confidence to be sensitive and tolerant to withstand difficulties. When you have added a sense of strength to your wisdom, move on to focusing on warmth. Imagine that you are warm and kind to yourself and to others. Create a facial expression to match, and try to keep it on as you work through the rest of the exercise. Imagine yourself speaking to someone kindly, and note your tone of voice. Imagine reaching out to someone with warmth, and feel what that might be like. Finally, imagine yourself with a sense of responsibility. Imagine that you have no interest in condemning or blaming others or yourself, and that you only want to do what is best, that you can help yourself and others through a difficult situation. Hold on to your compassionate facial expression and warmth, and focus on the experiencings of committing yourself to a compassionate path. Remember that it doesn't matter if you actually feel like you have these qualities or not. Just imagine that you do have them. It might be difficult to imagine yourself with these qualities, but no one gains them overnight. Like anything else, being wise, strong, warm, and responsible comes with time and practice. The next exercise is called compassionate flowing out. To try this exercise, sit somewhere quiet where you won't be disturbed and begin to focus on your breathing. Think about a time when you felt very kind and caring towards a person or beloved animal. Try not to choose a time when a person or animal was very distressed, because you are likely to focus on that distress instead of the kind and compassionate thoughts and feelings that you had towards them. Next, focus on the desire to help the person or animal and the feelings of kindness that will guide you to help. Remember that in this exercise, it is your intentions that are important, not how the person or animal responds. Bring to mind a specific time when you felt compassionate towards them. Imagine yourself expanding as you are becoming calmer, wiser, stronger, and more responsible, and being able to help them. Pay attention to your body as you remember how it felt to be kind, and how you genuinely desired that person or animal to be free of suffering and for them to flourish. Spend a minute or two thinking about the tone of your voice and the kind things that you thought or said. that you wanted to help them. Spend another minute or two thinking about how good it felt to be kind towards them. Finally, focus only on your desire to be helpful and kind. The sense of warmth, feeling of expansion, your kind tone of voice, and the wisdom in your voice and in your behaviours. When you have finished this exercise, you may want to take notes of how you felt when you were kind and compassionate. Did you feel good about it? Did they feel good about it? Moving on, this next exercise is compassion flowing in. Memory can be a great tool for provoking and practicing compassion. Begin with your soothing rhythm breathing again and practice this for a minute or two. Once you feel that your body has slowed down a bit, prepare for the exercise by allowing your body posture and facial expression to become compassionate. Maybe relax a little bit and crack a little smile, if you can. Feel free to play around with postures and facial expressions, however you feel comfortable. But whatever expression and posture you go for, they should be gentle. Once you are ready, think of a time when someone has been kind to you. Like the previous exercise, you shouldn't think of a time when someone was kind to you because you were in distress. The point of this exercise was not to focus on your distress, but the desire of somebody else to be kind and helpful. Put on your compassionate expression and adopt a compassionate body posture. Recall how it felt when you received this kindness. Spend a minute thinking about the expressions of the other person who was kind to you and mimic them if it helps. If you're having trouble remembering them, imagine the person moving towards you with a smile on their face or their head tilted a little bit to one side. While recalling the memory, focus on the important sensory qualities of your memory. Trying the following steps. Focus on the kinds of things the person said, as well as their tone of voice when they spoke. Spend 1 minute on this. Next, focus on the feelings of the emotion in the person, what they really felt for you in that moment. Focus on that for another minute. Finally, focus on the entire experience. Think about whether they touched you in a friendly or comforting way, and whether they helped you in some other way. Allow the experience of gratitude and joy in being helped grow into you. Remember to keep your expression as compassionate as you can, and spend a few minutes in this step. And when you are ready, let the memory gently fade. Come slowly out of the exercise and take some notes about how you felt during it. The final exercise is about our expectations. Imagine you decide to go for a walk on a nice evening. Your walk takes you through a wood, and as you're walking through it, a guy comes out from behind the bushes and jumps and scares you. You'd be terrified. But now imagine you're on the same walk, and just before you get into the wood, a man approaches you and says, "Watch out. There's some bloke in the woods and he's jumping out and trying to scare people." And after walking in the wood for 5 minutes, the same bloke jumps out at you. How scared would you be? Less scared than in the first scenario? Life is like the woods. In life, we are destined to experience some level of suffering. But if we recognise and expect it, like knowing that the man will jump out on us, its impact on us is reduced. We can handle it a little bit better. Sometimes we can't change negative things in our lives. It's not our fault, and it's nothing personal against us. It's life. It has no rules or vendettas. Understanding this allows us to accept suffering a little bit better, maybe preventing some of those negative thoughts about ourselves. All in all, there are tons of different ways you can build self-compassion, from little things like looking up while you're walking, forcing a smile, or doing some self-care activities, to bigger steps like seeking therapy or changing your habits and routines to encourage more compassionate things. I hope that you have found this podcast enjoyable, and I'd just like to thank you for your time and for your attention.